thank you much. And kind of wrapping this section up, there's a few other pieces of information I'd love to share with you as well. Another statistic that we had just invented over the last year, and this is something that we came up with when I was fortunate enough to be coaching at Georgia State University, is something we called attrition. And attrition was our way of measuring what is the percentage of offensive plays that result in us not getting an attack. And we exclude, by the way, we're excluding from the attrition statistic the reception errors. So if we got aced, we're obviously excluding that from attrition. And again, we wanted to get aced less than 8% of the time. And so this may be a play that came apart, it fell apart, it's typically started out of system, but we counted an attrition play as a play that we were able to receive serve, but we weren't able to jump off the ground and attack the ball one-handed with pace. So that was kind of our standard for that. So if you gave up a free ball, for example, that was considered an attrition play. If we were on the ground, just hitting a standing down ball over the net, that was called an attrition play. We just found it to be a play where we really weren't able to effectively run an offense. And so we started to develop that. Our total on that was below 4%. We wanted that to happen less than 4% of the plays for us. So again, it was just a statistic that we made up. And again, I invite every coach on here to make up her and his own statistics, because it's all about just trying to figure out what matters to your team with your players, and existing statistics may or may not solve that problem for you. I think we all can be creative enough to think of new ways to look at the game, and new ways that we can measure the game for the benefit of our players. So that attrition statistic I wanted to just share with everybody. A few other points going back to first ball kill and how it is influenced by the quality of serve reception. We actually found that the value of an in-system pass was 18% more likely to get a first ball kill than if we passed out of system, and obviously 100% more than if we got aced. So we put 18% more first ball kills as the value of what an in-system pass did for us. And again, knowing the number was helpful because we would share that with players. And from young player to veteran international elite player, when they're out in there and they're tired and they're training out on the beach and they've put long hours in, and they're continuing to work on service reception, sometimes that can be a motivating factor. It can be a why to the player. Hey, look, this is really going to improve our game, because the more we can pass in system, the more likely we're going to get. It's 18% more likely we're going to get a first ball kill, and those directly lead to us winning. So it's just good information from a coaching perspective. It's a way to give the player a little bit of motivational feedback. We also found two other values for in-system passing. One was when we passed in-system, we were 11% less likely to commit an error, an attack error on the play. And when we passed in-system, we were 5% less likely to get dug. And so certainly those three data points are interrelated, of course, but I wanted to just share those with you and invite you again, if you think that is something that you would like to know. It's something that's fairly easily measured by just some live tracking while your players are training and competing, or done later from the video. But that's just another approach that we took to the game. And then lastly, before we move on to our fourth chapter for the discussion today, is I wanted to share the results of some great findings that we were able to locate. Most recently, we put this. And lastly, just picking up where we left off, we did some research that we published in May of this year. And for anyone who's listening who wants a copy of it, just go to my blog. It's at scienceofvolleyball.com. And scroll down, you'll find it. We put it up there in PDF format. And what we did with that study is we looked at the influence on serve receive. So this was all college beach volleyball. The influence on serve receive of various factors: experience of the player, pressure, and how they performed on the previous play. And what we found was that serve receive is heavily influenced by experience, pressure the player is feeling, and her prior failure on the play before that. And so what we found was if a player passes the ball or receives serve out of system, she's 18% more likely to pass the next ball out of system if she receives the next ball and without an intervening timeout. So we thought that was a really significant insight into the game because it certainly drives tactics. If it's true for us, it's probably true for our opponent. And it also allowed us some insight into the psyche of the player and allowed us perhaps to, if we were capable ourselves, to do some of that mental training with the player and how to overcome a prior failure. We could do that. And if we weren't the right person for that, allowed us as a coach to at least perhaps bring in the right person to do that. So we were able to get some insight into the psyche of the player. Interestingly, that if a player gets aced, they're 23% more likely to pass the next ball out of system than if they were just past the first one in system. So again, just some really interesting data that we were able to pull, and this came from looking at a little over 50,000 service receptions over 5 seasons of collegiate beach volleyball. We also found that the experience of the player influenced her ability to serve receive after a previous out of system pass. So what we essentially found was that performance following failure, meaning that performance on the second ball the player received after the first one was out of system, players, the younger they were, the worse they did on the second ball, essentially, with one interesting exception, which was that we found juniors in college were the best at it, as opposed to what we thought we might have found, which was seniors would be the best at overcoming that prior adversity on the prior play. But outside of that one exception, we found a link between the experience factor, meaning the younger the player was, the less experience she had in the game, the more likely she was to continue to pass out of system if the play before that was an out of system pass. And then finally, in the same vein, we looked at pressure factors in the game. Again, to the same question. If a player passes out of system, what factors in terms of pressure, what situations are more likely to cause her to perform even worse on the next play? And we looked at 3 pressure components. One was playing while the score was close, and that we just meant the score was within 3 points. Playing at the end of the game, and that we just meant in the final 7 points of the game. And then playing from behind. So we thought those are the 3 kind of situations in a volleyball game where players probably feel the greatest pressure to perform. And what we found was if players generically were 18% more likely to follow an out-of-system pass with another out-of-system pass, that jumped 10% under any pressure condition. So whether they were behind, it was at the end of the game, or the score was close, they were 28% more likely to pass out of system following an out of system pass than usual. And the condition that caused players to feel the most pressure and degrade their performance the most was being behind in the score. And so we thought that was really interesting. There's a lot of data in there, and there's a lot more to mention, but I just wanted to highlight for our audience some of the things that we found in there, because knowing that a younger player feels some pressure to perform in the serve receive portion of the game after a prior bad pass or poor pass, if you will, and knowing that players are more likely to perform suboptimally when they're behind in the score or at the end of the game or when the score was close, again, allows us coaches to have some insights into players in real time, if you will, and perhaps understanding them better will be key for us coaches to coach them better in that moment. So why don't we take another break? It's out in, I believe I published it